What's happening in Minneapolis is devastating. What may happen in New Orleans could be even worse. Minneapolis has a Democratic governor and a Democratic mayor who are working together to protect their city. New Orleans does not. If Minneapolis is the tip of the spear, New Orleans is the handle. A blue city in a red state being used as a test case. So goes New Orleans, so goes the South.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like J.P. Morrell, the president of the New Orleans City Council, who we heard up top. That was from a hearing convened in New Orleans last week by Democratic members of Congress to highlight the impact of an immigration enforcement surge in and around the city. We'll hear some extended clips from the testimony and discussion there, which help illuminate the position many southern cities are in as they contend with ICE and Border Patrol activity. Later, in our Arts and Culture segment, we'll pay tribute to the father of Black History Month. But first, the news roundup. This week, we'll talk about the aftermath of the big winter storm across several southern states, and take a look at a single tale of deportation in Alabama. But to start with, some alarming news from Georgia. Here's the audio from an Instagram reel posted on Wednesday, January 28th by Fulton County Commissioner Mo Ivory.
Hi, everybody. Listen, I know you're watching the news. You're seeing a lot of stuff about this FBI raid at the Fulton County elections and registrations. I'm on the inside right now. So I just want you to be real discerning about all that you're hearing from people who are on the outside of what's going on. I'm going to give you the truth about what's happening. So they served a warrant, the FBI, this is Trump, serving a warrant to go pick up the 2020 ballots, which are in a secure location inside of here, 700 boxes. The first warrant that they gave was incorrect legally, they didn't follow the right procedure. They went back and they fixed it. And they came back and now they aren't actually collecting the boxes. They are in the chain of command in Fulton County is that once they are archived, they become the possession of the clerk of Superior Court, which is Shay Alexander. She is here and she is with them inventorying everything that they're taking. We, the commissioners, the chairman, the county attorney, are trying to figure out a legal plan as to maybe an injunction, a motion to quash. We don't know yet. We're trying to figure it out. We're getting all kinds of legal advice to stop this because once they have the ballots, how do we then turn around and do something different when they've already got their hands on it? So this is an attempt to take your vote away. This is all about November 2026, about the primary on May 19th and then the November election. He does not want the midterm elections to take away his power. So he's trying to create chaos. So this is what he does. Chaos in Minnesota, chaos in Fulton County. We are a target. Protect your vote at all costs. I'm telling you, everybody always says your life depends on it. Oh, your life does depend on it this time.
The FBI served a warrant Wednesday on Fulton County Clerk Shay Alexander and seized 700 boxes of ballots from the 2020 presidential election, along with digital images of the ballots and the 2020 voter rolls. Despite the efforts of Ivory and other local officials, they were not able to block the federal agents from removing the archived election materials from the building and from their custody. It's unclear what the FBI is looking for, but it's obviously connected to President Donald Trump's big lie that the 2020 election, in which Georgia, among other swing states, voted for Joe Biden, was stolen from him. Georgia came under particular pressure from Trump in the weeks after the election, because unlike some of the other swing states, it had a Republican governor and Republican-dominated legislature. It was where then-Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger received the infamous phone call from Trump, who asked him to, quote, find just enough votes to change the result in the state. It was also where Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis brought indictments against Trump and 18 co-defendants over that phone call and other actions aimed at overturning the election. That case fell apart when it was removed from Willis's jurisdiction because of a personal relationship she had with a special prosecutor she hired. But Trump no doubt nurses a grudge about it, as he does against anyone who's ever tried to hold him accountable legally, electorally, or otherwise. Like, for example, former federal prosecutor Jack Smith, who also indicted Trump on election obstruction charges. He told Congress in testimony just last month that Georgia was, quote, ground zero, unquote, for his case that the president led a criminal conspiracy to overturn the election. Against that backdrop, the seizure of Fulton County ballots raises obvious concerns about the administration's motives. Georgia remains a swing state, and there are multiple statewide elections, including governor and senator this year, in addition to congressional races. Fulton County is home to Atlanta and is the largest county in the state, with more than 1.1 million residents, nearly half of them black. Both the county and city governments are dominated by Democrats. The extraordinary seizure of the ballots by the FBI has set off alarm bells among the county's leadership and Georgia Democrats in general. Fulton County Commission Chair Rob Pitts told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that there were no irregularities or discrepancies for the federal investigators to find. Fulton County's ballots were counted 3 times in 2020, twice by machine and once by hand, under the supervision of a bipartisan panel with representatives from both presidential campaigns. All 3 confirmed the result. Biden won 73% of the vote, with 381,000 total ballots. Biden won the state overall by just under 12,000 votes. So theoretically, if someone alleged some kind of fraud by about 3% of Fulton County voters, it could be enough to contend that the state should have gone to Trump. But Georgia Democrats and advocates for fair elections fear something more forward-facing from the investigation. That even without bringing any charges, it will provide fuel for distrust and allegations of fraud in the state's 2026 and 2028 elections. State Representative Sarah Draper, an Atlanta Democrat and voting rights attorney, told the Georgia Recorder that the raid was, quote, an assault on our democracy. She added, quote, this is certainly an attempt to sow chaos. It is an attempt to undermine confidence in our elections. It's focused on Fulton County because this is where the Democratic voters are, unquote. The investigation could also provide a pretext for the Republican-dominated State Board of Elections to take over the administration of voting in Fulton County. A law passed by Republican legislators after the 2020 election gave the board that power. That would remove local control of things like the number and location of polling stations, early voting schedules, and other important aspects of an election. So, needless to say, this will be a story to watch. By the time this episode is released, hopefully conditions will have improved in parts of several southern states that were hit hard by the winter storm that blasted through on January 24th and 25th. From East Texas through northern Louisiana and Mississippi to Memphis and Nashville, the storm brought snow and ice that downed trees, knocked out power, and made roads and highways hazardous. More than 130,000 households in Mississippi lost power for days, along with more than 110,000 households in the Nashville area. At the peak, Nashville Electric Service said 230,000 people were without power, the most in the company's history. According to the Mississippi Free Press, more than half of the residents in 13 Mississippi counties still didn't have power as of Wednesday. The state had reported at least 10 deaths caused by the weather. The cold temperatures brought unfamiliar shocks in many areas. In Louisiana's Caddo Parish, 2 men died of hypothermia. In Texas, 3 young boys drowned when they walked onto thin ice on a frozen pond. Even as states in the Deep South were working to get back on their feet after that storm, another one was brewing off the Atlantic coast. At the time of this recording, Winter Storm Gianna is threatening a so-called bomb cyclone, predicted to bring snow and high winds across the Carolinas and Virginia. All of this comes just a year after a huge storm in January 2025 dropped record snowfall across coastal states from Texas to North Carolina, with New Orleans registering a one-day record of 8 inches. As we've all learned in weather reports over the past few decades, these kinds of severe winter storms and cold snaps are triggered by disruptions to the polar vortex, large masses of cold air that circle the Earth's poles. It had long been predicted that a warming climate overall could push more warm air toward the poles, destabilizing the polar vortex and sending cold air rushing farther south than usual. And that's indeed what appears to be happening. The cold air descends farther and most forcefully through the heart of the continental U.S., including into states like Louisiana and Alabama, where much of the infrastructure and many people's homes aren't equipped to deal with the severe chill. Of course, most conservative southern state leaders either avoid talking about climate change or just outright call it a hoax. But from snow in the bayous to ice storms in the Delta to hurricanes in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the climate will continue to not care what conservative southern lawmakers think. Stay warm, everybody. The last thing I wanted to mention in the roundup is a recommendation of a very good feature story published last week at AL.com, which is the digital descendant of the now-defunct Birmingham News. The article by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter John Archibald tells the story of Alfonso Andrade, known as Fonzie to family and friends, who grew up in northern Alabama and didn't even know he wasn't a U.S. citizen until high school. His family emigrated from Mexico when he was so young that he doesn't remember anything but life in the United States. He graduated from the local high school in Bluntsville, Alabama, and absorbed a love of football and an easygoing drawl, which makes him stand out now in the city of Leon, Mexico, where he settled after being deported last year because of 2 minor marijuana possession charges a few years ago. Andrade is cut off from his American fiancée and their 18-month-old son. He's trying to find a way to come back to the country that is the only home he knows. Archibald's article notes that immigration agents arrested more than 5,700 people for deportation in Alabama in the first 10 months of last year, only a small percentage of whom had committed serious crimes. Many had criminal records for misdemeanors, like Andrade's. Many others had no criminal records at all. It's a great, detailed, and very personal look at the actual impacts of Trump's mass deportation campaign. You can find the link in the show notes. And speaking of immigration enforcement, that brings us to the hearing last week in New Orleans. It was a shadow hearing convened by congressional Democrats on the House Committee on Homeland Security, led by Representatives Troy Carter of New Orleans and Benny Thompson of Mississippi. Other Democrats on the committee joined them on January 26th in the New Orleans City Council chambers, including Representatives Seth Magaziner of Rhode Island and Tim Kennedy of New York. The aim of the hearing was to put a spotlight on New Orleans' experience during a surge in local immigration enforcement, which hasn't been as highly publicized or invasive as those in Minneapolis, Chicago, and some other larger cities, but has still been disruptive and traumatic for families across the area. The Department of Homeland Security announced what they called Operation Catahoula Crunch in December, sending about 200 ICE and Border Patrol agents to the New Orleans area. If you're curious about the name, Catahoula is a lake in central Louisiana, and it also refers to the Catahoula leopard dog, a popular hunting companion that is the state canine. The word Catahoula comes from the language of the Taintsa people, who populated Louisiana's southern woodlands before Europeans arrived. It means big, clear lake. There is some obvious and ugly irony, of course, in an immigration roundup taking its name from a Native American word. Anyway, Catahoula Crunch has been much smaller in scale than the surge in Minneapolis, where some 3,000 federal agents were deployed. And according to multiple reports, agents have seemed to focus much of their attention on areas in surrounding counties rather than in New Orleans proper, where, among other things, they are more likely to be received warmly by locals. But within the city, their actions have created stress on the immigrant communities that make up about 9 to 10% of the population. The hearing gave local officials and nonprofit leaders the chance to detail and describe those impacts. To start off, Congressman Benny Thompson offered an example of one particularly egregious case and connected it to violence that ICE and Border Patrol agents have inflicted in Minneapolis and elsewhere.
Last year, right here in New Orleans, the Trump administration lured an immigrant mother and her child to the local ICE field office, locked their attorney out of the room, and snuck the mother and child out the back door and into detention. Before anyone could get to the court, ICE had this mother and her United States citizen child, who suffers from stage 4 cancer, on an airplane to Honduras. This unfolded in a matter of hours. When Democrats repeatedly confronted Republicans and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, begging them to let this family come back to New Orleans for cancer treatment, they refuse. The Trump administration relishes the notoriety and celebrates the cruelty. Sadly, things are only getting worse. Clergy have been shot with pepper balls. A baby girl was nearly killed when immigration officials shot pepper spray through her parents' truck window. Renee Good was shot to death 3 weeks ago. Alex Petty was murdered just this weekend after he was already restrained. An ICE detainee in Texas was allegedly choked to death by his guard. Citizen and immigrants are being dragged out of their homes in the dead of night in their underpants for no reason at all. And under President Trump's and Kristi Noem's leadership, 2025 was the deadliest year on record for individuals in ICE facilities. And I fear this year may set a new record as deaths of individuals in ICE facilities are already piling up.
Congressman Troy Carter, who has represented New Orleans since 2021, noted that many of the immigrant families being affected by ICE enforcement first arrived after Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and helped rebuild the city.
In December, these things escalated dramatically here in Louisiana as Department of Homeland Security commenced the so-called Operation Catahoula Crunch. This enforcement campaign has been profound and chilling effects on the immigrant communities, including many who first came here to help rebuild our city after the catastrophic devastations of Hurricane Katrina and others in 2005. These individuals arrived when we needed them most, and then they stayed. They set up homes, raised families, started businesses, and became integral members of our community. But they're now under threat. In Louisiana, we've heard heartbreaking stories of children, United States citizens who were deported. We've heard about a child with cancer who was caught up in enforcement actions. We've seen children stay home from school, afraid to leave their houses. We've seen businesses shuttered because their owners and workers live in fear. And most tragically, we've seen deaths, including a Honduran oysterman who was drowned while fleeing federal immigration agents. Here in New Orleans, we welcome partnership with federal authorities. Let me be very clear. We welcome partnership with federal authorities, but we do not welcome occupation. And that distinction is critical and must be clear. If you want to help, coordinate with our mayor, coordinate with our city council, coordinate with our sheriffs and our police department, coordinate with our parish presidents, coordinate with our leaders, and we will show you how to help us best. But if you're here to have shock and awe, political theater, and to violate people's rights, we just don't need you here.
New Orleans' new mayor, Helena Moreno, just took office in January. She's the city's first Latina mayor. Her father is Mexican and her mother is American, and she was born in Mexico. Like most New Orleans mayors, she inherited a city in a fiscal and physical mess. And like many New Orleans mayors, she also came in on the heels of an administration racked by scandals and allegations of misconduct. Her predecessor, former Mayor LaToya Cantrell, is under federal indictment for wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and lying to a grand jury. On top of everything else, Moreno was sworn in as the ICE surge was already underway, scaring many families away from jobs and schools. She told the committee members that she's receiving almost no communication from DHS.
I want to make clear that I have received no direct information from Border Patrol and that they have kept me and city leadership in the dark, except for information that we've received through media news releases. What we know is that the operation began in early December. News releases from the Department of Homeland Security describe the operation as targeting, quote, the worst of the worst offenders in the New Orleans area. Now, despite these constant claims by DHS and Border Patrol, what we witnessed has not been the case. What we have witnessed is nonviolent individuals being overwhelmingly targeted and profiled. Across our city and region, teams of agents were deployed to profile, question, and round up predominantly Hispanic individuals. Countless stories were reported by our local media of Hispanic people, including some who are American citizens, being questioned, chased, and detained. This has caused widespread fear throughout our city and our region. Parents took their kids out of school, workers stopped showing up at their jobs, and my church, where we have a large Spanish-speaking service, people stopped coming to worship.
She went on to challenge the DHS narrative that it is carefully targeting known criminal immigrants. In fact, she said, most of the people being caught up have never been charged with a crime.
I support, of course, taking murderers, shooters, rapists, and violent offenders off our streets. But as I mentioned before, it became very clear from the start of Catahoula Crunch that the mode of operation was for agents to find and target groups of predominantly Hispanic individuals and then figure out who they are later. The numbers released by Assistant Secretary of DHS, Tricia McLaughlin, on January 9th, which was reported by local news, by the way, claimed that Operation Catahoula Crunch had made over 560 arrests, once again claiming to nab the, quote, worst of the worst, yet only 6% of those arrested had any type of criminal record.
She closed with a plea to the congressional representatives to work on serious immigration reform, including providing opportunities for legal work and citizenship for people who are already peacefully living and working here.
This is a cruel, divisive agenda lacking humanity. Overwhelmingly, the people of America question what these ICE agents are even doing, except for creating chaos, ignoring the Constitution, and costing lives. Close to 2/3 of this country now believes that ICE enforcement has gone too far. I'm hearing from people on the left and on the right who say that this is ultimately just un-American. I'm the first Latina mayor of the city of New Orleans. I was born in Mexico to an American mother. My father is originally from Mexico. I'm an American by birth and here to tell you that what actually makes America great is our diversity, is our cultural differences, and it's our overall diverse background. Do we need comprehensive immigration reform? I think the clear answer is yes. And it's complicated, and it's not easy. But we ask you, please take on this very important work. We need a path for those who are doing the right thing, those hardworking members of our society to gain citizenship. These are our neighbors, workers, friends, who often, due to difficult and complicated circumstances, are undocumented. As members of Congress, I ask you to please take on this very important type of reform. But more than anything, right now, we need you. We need you to continue to step up, to intervene, and to hold ICE and Border Patrol accountable. Thank you.
City Council President J.P. Morrell, a public defender and former state legislator who has been on council since 2022, made some pointed observations about the differences between a city like Minneapolis in a blue state and New Orleans in a red one.
What's happening in Minneapolis is devastating. What may happen in New Orleans could be even worse. Minneapolis has a Democratic governor and a Democratic mayor who are working together to protect their city. New Orleans does not. We are a Democratic city and a Republican state governed by leaders who at the state level support the weaponization of ICE agents against anyone who appears to have international heritage. For those of you familiar with New Orleans, that's pretty much all of us. If Minneapolis is the tip of the spear, New Orleans is the handle. A blue city and a red state being used as a test case. So goes New Orleans, so goes the South. New Orleans is a free city and will remain a free city. People don't wear masks in our city unless it's a Mardi Gras parade. We're a city that looks after its own. It's how we do things around here. In the face of adversity, New Orleans has always resisted. We resisted 2 foreign empires, civil war, segregation, and injustice, and we will resist this too. This is the city of be nice or leave and be kind to all kind.
He also warned that the immigration crackdown is on a continuum of oppression that connected to other chapters of American history and presages broader attacks on civil rights and liberties.
What's happening here isn't new. The rhetoric and violence that has metastasized throughout our country is nestled deep in our history book, ultimately being repeated right before our very eyes. It starts with immigration enforcement, moves to voter suppression, and ends in military occupation. As we sit here today, we as a community have witnessed firsthand in a barrage of constitutional violations, complete disregard for due process, public resources being used to intimidate communities into submission. When our country's founders, with wisdom and flaws and all, contemplated these dark times we find ourselves presently in, and thus created a constitution that enshrined liberties to every citizen and laid the foundation for what we call democracy. Let me add, the depth of this invasion, the squandering of local resources, state resources, and federal resources really runs up right against the Third Amendment. Our founders created the Third Amendment to not order soldiers in our homes. When you look at what's happening with ICE across this country, you have a monarch who is trying to force invaders into our communities.
Historical analogies also came from Alana Odoms, executive director of the ACLU of Louisiana. You might remember her from an episode we did in New Orleans last summer. She spoke defiantly at a rally in support of immigrants organized by Service Employees International Union. Her words last week were just as sharp. She compared ICE and Border Patrol to earlier, sinister law enforcement entities.
As you know, the origins of policing began with slave patrols, where certain citizens were empowered to accost and to take anyone they believed to be a fugitive. ICE and CBP have adopted these same tactics to capture and brutalize both American citizens and people of diverse backgrounds, assuming they are fugitives and violating their fundamental constitutional rights.
Odom said that even the name of the operation has a resonance with the slave-hunting patrols that once roamed the countryside. She also detailed the multiple layers of community support that the ACLU and other partners have created in the face of the federal crackdown.
Catahoula Crunch, the name itself, is dog whistle. Catahoula is Louisiana's state dog, but it was historically used to hunt and track human beings during the period of slavery. That symbolism is not accidental. It reflects how communities of color experience these operations, not as public safety, but as human, person, and manhunts. When ICE and CBP ramped up their operations here, though, we prepared to deploy our own learnings from other cities and our own learnings from working deeply in community and with our partners. Our team partnered with the Southeast Dignity and Detention Coalition and other advocacy groups and leaders to enact a network of mutual aid and information channels to immigrant communities and to ally groups. This network facilitated the creation of a hotline to monitor CBP and ICE actions, to know where they were, what they were doing, and also to help with the dissemination of KYR materials, shelter-in-place guidance, and mutual aid actions such as grocery deliveries and family support. We were not about to let the government operate in the dark, and we were not going to allow our citizens to shelter in place without the necessary supports.
Omera Lopez is the director and managing attorney for a nonprofit organization called Immigration Services and Legal Strategy, which provides pro bono representation to people caught in the immigration system. He told the story of one client who had attempted to navigate the system legally, but is now being held in a Louisiana detention center.
This disgraceful operation, Catahoula Crunch, is an unfortunate but foreseeable outgrowth of decades of bipartisan failure to address immigration reform, a system which still operates fundamentally on the framework set out in 1965. As a result of the limited legal pathways available to people seeking to immigrate to the United States, many have been forced to take treacherous paths and risk their lives entering the United States without permission. The United States' interventionist foreign policy in places like Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and many others have destabilized governments and forced many citizens of those countries to flee.
Tanya Wolf, the Southeast Advocacy Manager for the National Immigrant Project, said that the operation has terrified many of the families she works with.
Today, I would like to bring to your attention the humanitarian crisis and state violence that immigrant communities in the city of New Orleans and surrounding communities in Jefferson Parish are facing. Families are forced to shelter in place because of Operation Catahoula Crunch, fearful of leaving their homes because of the possibility of detention and deportation. Because breadwinners can't go to work, immigrant individuals and families are at risk of losing their homes, going hungry, and sacrificing their children's right to an education. Immigrant community members, both with and without status, are being separated from their loved ones because of arbitrary arrests conducted by ICE, CBP, and cooperating local and state law enforcement agencies. This level of enforcement also has a negative impact on access to health care. Pregnant women missing prenatal appointments, newborns missing well baby checkups, children with infections whose parents fear taking them to the emergency room, uncontrolled diabetes, and a lack of access to prescriptions due to the fear of picking them up. A doctor in the community told me that one of their patients went off their blood thinners because they were so afraid of getting tackled and sustaining a brain bleed at the hands of ICE.
She spelled out the size and costs of the existing detention centers in Louisiana and noted that there are plans for more. And like other speakers, Wolf both challenged and pleaded with the members of Congress to take real action at the federal level.
Catahoula Crunch has also increased the number of people in ICE's detention centers, of which there are 10 in Louisiana and 1 in Mississippi. The latest data shows that ICE detention centers in these 2 states are collectively incarcerating 9,348 human beings. With the projected average daily cost to incarcerate a person in ICE detention at $164.25, we are spending about $1,539,409 a day to detain our immigrant community members in these states alone. In 2025, Governor Landry reopened Camp J at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. Our conversations with people detained inside Camp J revealed that the facility reopened with life-threatening shortfalls, no medical unit, pipes that overflowed with feces and urine, and no religious services. To this day, taxpayer dollars are being used to detain a 72-year-old man diagnosed with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's at Camp J, who has been subjected to medical neglect and psychological abuse. Last year, 32 people died in ICE custody, an all-time high. Now there have been 6 deaths in ICE custodies in just 10 days of 2026, including a homicide of someone in detention at the hands of jail guards. ICE is already jailing an unprecedented 70,000 plus people. If Congress continues to bankroll ICE's mass detention program, this crisis will only worsen. ICE will use this funding to keep expanding a dangerous infrastructure, which includes local, state and federal jails, prisons, military bases, warehouses, and more. 2 proposals to warehouse people, literally like cattle, are in the Southeast, in Port Allen, Louisiana, and Byhalia, Mississippi. If open, that would add an additional 9,000 beds to these 2 states' already grim total.
The hearing ended as hearings do, with thanks from the congressman for everyone's testimony and time. As for what the members of Congress took away from it, we may get to find out soon as negotiations over the DHS budget continue. It's February, which means Black History Month has begun. The annual exploration and celebration of African American history and culture has become a staple of the seasonal landscape, although the intensity and sincerity of its observances can vary widely. What you might or might not know is where it came from and who started it. Carter Godwin Woodson was born in 1875 in New Canton, Virginia, an unincorporated community about 60 miles northwest of Richmond. His parents had been enslaved until the Civil War. During the war, Woodson's father escaped from the plantation where he'd been held and volunteered to help Union troops. Woodson's mother and 2 of her brothers were literate and taught Woodson and his siblings to read. As a teenager, Woodson worked in coal mines and eventually was able to enroll in Douglas High School, a black academy in Huntington, West Virginia. Within a few years of earning his diploma, Woodson returned to the school as its principal. While holding that position, he enrolled in college classes at Berea College in Kentucky, earning a bachelor's degree in 1903. After teaching a few years in the Philippines, which had recently become an American territory, he earned a master's degree at the University of Chicago and then a doctorate in history from Harvard. He was the second black student to earn a Harvard Ph.D. after W.E.B. Du Bois. He joined the faculty at Howard University, becoming dean of the School of Liberal Arts and head of graduate faculty. But he became frustrated with the mainstream of American history scholarship, which gave little notice to the country's black population. In 1915, he founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, an organization that still exists, now called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. One of his many projects was the proposal in 1926 of what Woodson called Negro History Week. He designated it for the second week of February, which includes the birthdays of both Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. The observance was popularized through black newspapers, schools, and colleges, and over the ensuing decades became more widely acknowledged across the country. In 1969, black students and faculty at Kent State University in Ohio proposed the creation of an entire Black History Month in February, which they observed with events and activities the next year. The idea spread quickly as the country struggled to come together after the advances of the Civil Rights Movement, and in 1976, Gerald Ford became the first president to recognize it with a formal proclamation, a practice that has been followed by presidents ever since, including, if somewhat grudgingly, Donald Trump. This year is the centennial of Woodson's original History Week, so it's worth remembering that the observance itself was the creation of a black Southerner who was born to formerly enslaved parents just 10 years after the end of slavery. The South is speckled with places named in Woodson's honor, including schools in Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, North Carolina, and Texas. His native state of Virginia honors him with schools and roads, as well as the Carter G. Woodson Institute for African American and African Studies at the University of Virginia. And in Washington, D.C., where he lived the latter decades of his life, his home is preserved as a National Historic Site, although currently closed for renovations. And a park with a statue of Woodson also bears his name. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit enterprise, and you can find information about supporting us on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. You can also reach out to me directly at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. Thanks to our friends in Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. We'll talk to you soon.